Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste, all of you, and welcome to this 10 p.m. live broadcast from the Jaipur Dialogues. And today, once again, we have a very familiar face for all our Jaipur Dialogues here, and that's Lieutenant General Ada Hasnain. Welcome, Hasnain Saab. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Namaskar, Jai Hind to everyone.
Okay, sir. So what is happening, what I'm going to talk today to you about is the hybrid war doctrine of China that you've been talking about. You're writing a lot about it. And we have discussed it also in the previous discussions with you. My point is that this whole template that China built about warfare in informationized conditions and which they have been, of course, also tom-tomming through their mouthpieces like Global Times and all. And if that is the level of what is called one aspect of the warfare in informationized setting, and that is their best that they can offer for information warfare in this hybrid warfare. And I have serious doubts about their capacity, capability, or even competence. How do you look at it?
Thank you, first of all. And thank you for taking cognizance of this particular article of mine on hybrid warfare. Because if you notice, for the last 5 months, no one has spoken much about hybrid warfare, except you and me, perhaps. Everyone has been looking at convention. Everyone has been looking at DBO as objective, Galwan as objective, Chushul as objective, Pengongso fingers as objectives. No one has looked at the aspect of what else is China doing. And is there something else to its strategy? Which is why I applied myself to it, and I realized that ever since April, when the Chinese opened up the front, so-called, they brought in those 2 motorized divisions of theirs, which were exercising in the depth. We have been always perceiving that they did it for the sake of some kind of a campaign-style strategy to capture areas in depth, particularly looking at the road, Darbuk, Shiok, DBO, or looking at the Pengongso fingers, or looking at Chushul and things like that. That's what we were. I started applying myself to another fact. Is that why didn't the Chinese occupy the Chushul features, which we occupied subsequently? Why didn't they attempt occupying it till as late as 29th of August, when we finally beat them in the race to it? And I realized that they didn't have troops with them. They didn't have sufficient troops. They did not come with any intent of fighting it out in the mountaintops. If you need to fight out the Indian infantry, well-trained, mountain-oriented infantry of the Indian army, you got to bring ratios of 9:1 to evict us from those mountaintops. You can bring a lot of armor and a lot of rocket forces and a lot of mechanized forces and everything else in the plain sectors and psych the whole world about it. But to get hold of the mountaintops, you need well-trained mountain infantry. They didn't have it. They don't have it with them. And I thought that's where the poodle faking was lying. They were poodle faking us. And therefore, there was some other intent. Their whole intent was to elongate this campaign, set the narrative for the geopolitical situation post-hybrid, and show us in poor light. You use their old strategy of three warfares, media, psychological, cyber, everything, and cow us down. They didn't expect a tiger-like response, which they finally got. And that is why I said that it was just a limited use of conventional forces applied on the line of actual control with a measure of information warfare, with a measure of many other things which we will speak about, which the Chinese hoped would convince the world that India was not up to it. The Indian army was far too weak, and the Indian leadership didn't have it in them to stand up to the Chinese challenge. And therefore, where was India thinking about its position in the post COVID-19 world. That is the kind of thing which the Chinese were intending to achieve.
But haven't it completely boomerang? Because what they achieved ultimately was because of all this saber rattling in Ladakh, then in the Taiwan Straits, in the East China Sea, in the South China Sea. They kind of brought everyone together. They brought America, India, Japan, Australia closer. They achieved the Quad, actually, which, in fact, India had been resisting Australia getting into it for a long time. Australia also, they were very close to China because they had a lot of trade interests. And with all that, China managed to achieve this, what is called a much delayed Quad grouping. That is one. And at the same time, they took a beating in Ladakh. Obviously, we've seen what happened in Galwan, and we also know the kind of troops that they have, the conscripts that they have over there. And those conscripts are certainly not up to it. Now, that's something that was a hidden factor and now known to everybody else. So I would say that though they did have a template of using the fifth generation warfare, but they've proven themselves to be totally incompetent.
Interesting observation. That's a very interesting observation. To my mind, let's take a look at the history of the use of so-called fifth generation warfare. The Chinese were the first to spring out from the lessons of the Gulf War I, if you remember. CNN entering into the drawing rooms. We discussed it in an earlier edition of our discussion here.
Right.
1993, within 3 years, they came out with this thing called War under Informationized Conditions, and the world was quite fascinated by it. The United States at that time was looking at transformation of the US Armed Forces, so it didn't probably pay too much attention to this particular aspect. In 10 years' time, the Chinese came out with the 3 strategies, which somehow focused on this whole aspect of psychological, legal, media, propaganda, everything like this, which are essential elements of information. The whole thing is the essential elements of information warfare. Now, information warfare, to my mind, has got 2 or 3 dimensions. Number 1 is to affect the minds of your adversary. There too, they have 2 subsets, perhaps the armed forces of the adversary, the political leadership of the adversary. So there are 2 different elements to this information warfare. To an extent, also the public of your adversary. The messaging must reach the public of the adversary, and we'll determine whether the Chinese have been able to achieve anything like this at all or not. Along with this, they did not just sit back on this and hope to achieve something through Sun Tzu's old principle of winning a war without fighting a war. They were very pragmatic. They also developed their armed forces, modernized them, particularly the rocket forces, the artillery, the missile forces. They modernized to a very great extent. So they were very clear that this was going to be a combination of conventional forces up to a point, and the rest of the elements of media, legal, propaganda, cyber, very, very important aspect of cyber. The second aspect of this information warfare and cyber combination was this whole aspect of going after what are called the networks of your adversary. Essentially, it is network-centric warfare. Because in today's world, almost all weapon systems, advanced weapon systems, are all networked together. It's all a question of, a shooter, sensor to shooter. Wherever you get the information, the sensor gets the information, and you have the shooter which then fires it. You have to have this network capability between the sensor and the shooter, and minimize the time which is there for it. So these are all essential element of network-centric warfare. How to neutralize this so that the enemy's networks are not capable. So these are the 2 aspects. The Chinese in this particular episode in the last 5 months have applied an element of conventional warfare, which is on the LAC, a little bit of it with those 2 divisions and a little more. A lot of psychological warfare through bringing in additional rocket forces and mechanized forces and displaying them, projecting them to the world through videos and things like that. At the same time, they have also attempted to cow us down with certain activities on the line of actual control. They've used global times. They've used their DAs, defense attaches, ambassadors, consuls as far away as Cape Town, Karachi, Lahore, and places like that to try and bring out lots of information into the English-speaking world, where the Chinese aren't not very good at English-speaking themselves. So into the English-speaking world, and a lot of fake accounts. 7,000 Twitter accounts is the last count which came to me. 7,000 fake Twitter accounts, despite the fact that Twitter is not even used in China. So obviously all used externally, right? And this is against India primarily. And now this is the first time the Chinese were attempting to use this in a larger dimension against Taiwan, against Vietnam, against Australia to an extent, and against the United States, of course. I think the Chinese have just not been able to get their act together. And one is very glad to see this, that they have not been able to get their act together. And one of the major constraints of not being able to get their act together is because of the response from India, the type of response they got from India. They were surprised, I can assure you, they were surprised. At the political leadership level, they expected a cowing down. There's a lot of complaint in India that the Prime Minister of India doesn't name China and things like that. This is all hogwash. At senior levels, you don't have to name your adversary. Right? You keep different options open for different timings. We are not at open war with China yet at all. And this whole situation may just turn around to be something completely different. So pragmatic political leaders don't start putting all their eggs into one basket and saying we are at war tomorrow. This is my answer to a lot of people who are complaining that the Indian leadership does not even name its enemy and things like that. We are pragmatic and sensible about it, not like the Chinese. The Chinese have been absolutely, they've been unthinking in their attitude and doing this and playing it in such a way that actually today, after 4 or 5 months, what I would say as a concluding remark to this question of yours is that they've actually added oodles of confidence to the Indian system. They've given confidence to the Indian army, they've given confidence to the Indian political leadership, everything, and the Indian nation at large.
Quite right. And not just that, they have also given a message to the world that they're not really up to it, and whatever hype that they had built up around their capability and all those discrete leaks that used to go into the Western media and all the networks that they had developed in the Western world, in the Western media, all that has come crashing down. I would consider that as a huge collapse of capability.
Absolutely. And if I may divert this aspect to another area, I think the Chinese were trying to copy the Russians. The Russians use this in Ukraine to a great extent. And it's all under the radar. It's not been written so much about. If you go on the Google probably gives you a little bit of information on this. But the Russians, I think, worked on this whole strategy of limiting the NATO advance towards its near abroad region without fighting it. Then instead of getting down to actually war fighting, the best way to limit Ukraine and take control of Ukraine was through the hybrid route. Create internal dissensions, create internal conflict, create a segment of people who support the Russians. There are a lot of old Ukrainian personnel there who were in support of the Soviet army. Make use of them. Make use of social media in a very big way. I'm not sure whether the Chinese actually went to the Russians to try and learn any lessons from them. Because if they had, they would have come out tops with a lot of lessons, because the Russians are very, very professional at it. But, and you've seen the Russians also went into Middle East to look after their interests. The port of Latakia in Syria, that airfield in Syria, defeat of the ISIS, there's that, and they themselves never got involved into conflict except 1 or 2 occasions here and there with their air force, a few air force elements which were there. But the Chinese I don't think, have got the measure of understanding of this. And as you said yourself, that this is the lesson which the world is learning. And I think the world should be very thankful to India. Because the way India has stood up, and you see now, it's not only the Quad, it is the Australia, France, India triennial. You're suddenly finding this is suddenly a new element which is emerging out here. And centered on India and the Indian Ocean. There's a lot of things built up in the Pacific, centered on the Indian Ocean and India there, with a confident, resurgent India, and I dare say in the future, a navy which is going to be essentially a blue water navy. I'm sure there'll be a lot of nations wanting to do business with India.
That's quite right. Ultimately, what matters in the international committee is the strength. And you can talk to other international, you can conduct international relations only from a position of strength. Only then you get the respect. You don't get the respect by talking idealistic claptrap, as it used to happen in the 50s and 60s. It was only after the 70s, when we won the Pakistan war, the Bangladesh war, that people did start taking India a little bit seriously. And of course, the things have changed completely after the Indians decided, or under Prime Minister Modi, to first cross the LOC, then cross the international border with Pakistan. And though, of course, we don't know, but China is, of course, accusing us of actually overstepping the LAC as well. So there is no longer that kind of that Lakshmana Rekha kind of a situation that used to be like in Kargil war, when India specifically did not cross the LAC, though the war would have been conducted, and the conduct of war would have been much easier if the forces had been given the go-ahead to cross the LAC, cross the LOC, and cut the supply lines. But I think that India, that diffidence is now over, and the world sees it. And because of that, the world respects India now.
In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that it is because of resurgent Indian strategic confidence, and I've written this in my article too, the article in the New Indian Express. I've written it there too, that a couple of events added up to the perception of strategic Indian confidence. Starting from essentially from the surgical strikes of 2016, after that the Balakot strike, and thereafter the 5th of August decisions on the constitutional abrogation of the constitutional provisions for Article 370 and 35A, and the very clear messaging which has subsequently emanated, and that is that Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir are both essential parts of India. We have a resolution of that by our parliament in 1994, and we have to abide by that. We have to aspire to get back this territory. All this definitely has sent home a very strong message of Indian confidence. And this is what perhaps worried the Chinese. This is one of the reasons why I think in the number of meetings that the Chinese and the Pakistanis have been having over the last 1 year or so, much of this must have been discussed. And particularly the possibility of the threats to the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and particularly the fact that India did not join the BRI initiative and was one of the few countries which resisted it, and sure there was no presence in Beijing in those conferences that Beijing conducted. And the Chinese were probably feeling very, very peeved by this entire thing, and felt it was time to actually send home a lesson, a strategic lesson to the world, that no major country, where part of anything, could actually resist the Chinese move towards its form of globalization and its outreach through the Silk, the maritime Silk strategy, Silk Road strategy, etc. But they got surprised, as you very correctly assessed. They got surprised, and this has panned out in a manner, in the last 5 months, has panned out in a very awkward manner. If you really see it, the first initial response that we had was hesitant. It was a hesitant response. It was only when we took the fine decision, and I really compliment the leadership for that decision, or making sure that you mobilize your troops to push in there. I could not have thought of pushing in 2 to 2.5, 3 divisions into Ladakh at any particular time. I wouldn't even wonder where is the space to deploy all that. But they have done it. And today, now you've seen with the Atal tunnel also being declared open, and the new road, the Dharcha road, which is opening up for the next season and all, our logistics will be absolutely no problem at all. And I'm very confident that even for the winter at the moment, this is something which the Chinese have been working a lot on the minds of the Indian public and attempting to show it to the Indian armed forces that the Indian troops will die of cold there, they don't have the clothing and they will not have the logistics, and where will they deploy themselves and things like that. Well, I think when India decides, when the Indian armed forces decide that they have to achieve something, then they just open up all the fronts. And that's exactly what has happened at the moment, right from Delhi, right till Pangong Tso. I think every single element of the armed forces is working in conjunction with each other and ensuring that the last crew reaches there in Pangong Tso, which is required for the Indian armed forces.
Okay, quite right. And it's very good that you brought in that discussion about the Rohtang Tunnel, because that eases up the logistics a great deal. Of course, they still have to go through the three passes, the Barla Chala, the Latongla, and the Tanglangla. And this third route which they have opened, where they have to cross only one major pass, and I am told, of course, subject to your confirmation, that unlike the other three passes, which remain blocked for nearly 6 months, this one has a block time of only about 2 months. And that is why, this is again subject to confirmation, the tunnel that is being thought of, instead of making 3 tunnels, they can make this one tunnel under Shingola and have this all-weather route. And that practically defeats complete designs of the Chinese, because their own routes are not open all the time. Their routes are very tenuous in the sense that you just have to knock off 2 roads and they're done.
There's no doubt about it that this alignment on the Dacha Road alignment is an outstanding thing, as you're right, very correctly appreciated. There's only a single pass to be negotiated. And that too, until the time when the tunnel is not in place, it will probably take you 3 to 4 years to be able to construct that tunnel. You will find that the BRO has the experience, for example, keeping open passes like Changla or Khardungla and places like that, which are even higher, 17,800, 18,000 feet and places like that. So they've got the machinery. What I'm told is that in recent weeks, a tremendous amount of fast-track acquisitions of earth-moving equipment, snow equipment, etc., has also been brought in, which will obviously be very, very helpful. And much against the Zojila route, this one is not under any kind of observation. It doesn't come under fire. It doesn't close down that way. So obviously, it's going to be a much, much easier task. And of course, once the tunnels are created, it'll be far better. And your viewers should also know that the Zojila tunnel is also under progress. That's a huge challenge. Of course, it's a huge challenge. And I do expect that it will take the better part of 8, 9, 10 years to construct. We are into, I think, his second or maybe his third year at the moment. But that will be a transformational kind of an achievement, because there'll be a direct entry from the valley into the plateau, into the Ladakh plateau, without having to wait for the Zojila tunnel or Zojila pass to open up in the month of end April, early May. That has been happening all these years. But notwithstanding that, you must remember also, Sanjay, that you also got a state-of-the-art transport fleet of the Indian Air Force at the moment.
Right.
The one thing which is maybe slightly negative is the fact that we still have only one airfield in Leh, although there's the second airfield at Thois, which is there and which can always be used as a subsidiary airfield. Maybe there'll be a time will have to come and we will have to look in depth slightly towards the Padam side and areas like that, for open areas in the Zanskar, for another strategic airfield, which will probably have to be developed at that stage. But notwithstanding that, in a die-hard sort of a situation, the 10 C-17 aircraft that we have with us, and recently I think we have bought $90 million worth of spares for it, as it was in the papers today, and also the Chinook helicopter, the double rotor helicopter, which is going to be the mainstay for the forward movement. You can do stocking in Leh, but what most people have to understand is that there is an obstacle in the middle in the form of the Ladakh range, which goes up to 18,000, 20,000 feet. And therefore, you have to step over the Ladakh range, and the Changla can be quite a challenge. The Changla is the main axis leading into the Darbuk area from where it goes to Pangong Tso. That can be a challenge. But with the Chinook, its capability of It's a high lift capability. This is one issue which will be actually overcome. This problem will be largely overcome during this winter.
So you consider that logistically we are not just well stocked, both in terms of rations as well as in terms of equipment, but we are fully ready.
I would say yes. And logistically, actually, whenever you ask a operation man, he never feels very satisfied. At any stage, you always feel that operationally we can have more because you can fall back on it. No, but I would say at a guesswork, I have not spoken to anyone in the field at the moment, but at guesswork, the kind of work which is going on, I can perceive, and in my mind, I can calculate all these things. Any trained staff officer or commander could calculate all this in the mind and discern as to how much effort has gone in. The challenges are definitely in the field of ammunition. Ammunition stocking, storage is not an easy thing in the field. You have to have a tremendous amount of cover for it, habitat for it. The second thing is a habitat for the personnel. And that's not easy to construct. And then defenses in the areas on the mountains, and this is all rock hard. The Kailash range itself, for example, is rock hard. I know, I've walked over it. It's not that muddy kind of thing where you can put in a pickaxe and start digging up your defenses there. You need to do a lot of blasting. So it's going to be that's a challenge, all right. But then I also look at it this way, that you got the Siachen example. And people should know that in Siachen, you may construct a couple of huts at a particular post, snow huts, etc. Most of the troops don't live in the snow huts. Most of the troops prefer to live in what is called a parachute. Because the amount of snow which comes here, you will have to start clearing off the snow from all the huts all the time. Right? All your effort will go into clearing the snow. Most of the time what happens is the huts in the winter get buried and you start living on top of the huts with your parachutes. And parachutes, there are millions of parachutes because they're all dropping of kerosene oil which keeps taking place every day. So double parachute, triple parachute, you put inside, put a Bukhari inside and you're pretty warm. So ingenuity, the infantry's ingenuity is what will actually shock the Chinese when they have a look at the way the Indian infantry lives up in Ladakh.
You're quite right. And they are living in what is called oxygenated and heated chambers. I wonder Absolutely. How they manage to acclimatize.
That's exactly of course, you mentioned in the early part of the discussion that they are conscripts primarily. They are from a system in which you have a one-child family. I'm not sure how motivated they are actually, because in a communist state, it is easy to put out a lot of propaganda and show a lot of photographs of highly motivated marching soldiers and this and that, all kinds of things. I'm not sure, because the reports which come to us from a lot of people who visit China otherwise and who have met these, probably intermingled with the soldiers, do tell us that the state of morale is not what one can expect in a country which is now as advanced as China. Because this is a typical thing which happens. Let me tell you, your viewers an example. I was, as a younger officer, I was on the line of control on the Pakistani side. And we had a unit from the Pakistan army which came from Saudi Arabia after having a 3-year tenure there, right? And they appeared in front of us in fantastic looking Reebok sports shoes and lots of, sports equipment on top, wearing sports dresses and clothing and things like that. We used to wonder, where are these guys, very rich fellows? And we realized that these people are not the types who are going to fight us, because they had got a lot of money with them and they were not motivated to stay there. They wanted to finish their tenure somehow and get out of them. That's the reports we got very clearly at that time. Now, this is the kind of thing which happens with conscripts here. They wait to complete their 2 years, 2.5 years, somehow, chutkara hua mile, let's get back and all. Not like the Indian Army. The Indian Army's got a turnover system. And you are there as a part of your regimentation, as a part of your regimental badge. In the glacier, in the Siachen Glacier, let me tell you, a unit feels very, very strange if you find that the reports are going of how many people in the unit have got snow injuries and how many of them have been evacuated by air. It's like a competition almost. Because a unit coming out at the end of the tenure there and with a high percentage of snow casualties is considered as a unit which is not highly motivated enough. So the unit will make sure that they do everything to remain absolutely fighting fit for war at all times. I'm not sure if the PLA has that kind of a system there. If they do, well, good for them.
Well, from all accounts that I am also getting, your assessment seems to be absolutely correct and good for us. And and that's a major difference from 1962, because in 1962, China was actually a war-hardened unit. They had fought their civil war. After that, they had fought in the Korean War, and they were quite a fighting-fit unit. And whereas Indian forces had been degraded by our strange policies. And that's why I think that was one of the major reasons for China getting upper hand. Now let us come to another aspect that we have seen lately over the last week or so. That a China guy from the foreign ministry is talking about and cautioning China that, okay, these guys are there in within 20-30 miles of the LAC, and they can drive into China at will. That's something strange that I have not seen in the last 50 years. And I remember reading newspapers from very early on. So last 50, I think I was about 5 when I started reading newspapers. About last 55 years, I haven't seen such a thing emerging from China that would appear almost defeatist. And another thing is that they suddenly started talking about the 1959 claim line. We know all about the lines, the Johnson line, the McDonald line, the 1959 claim line, the 1962 line. My impression is that this 1959 line, as it stands, I think China are ahead of this 1959 claim line in most areas, except in the Demchok sector and in the Himachal sector, maybe. Though, of course, I think this line was not in the Himachal sector. So, except in the Demchok sector, they're already ahead of this 1959 line. So, why are they talking about this 959 line 1? And why are they talking about the Indian Army driving into Ladakh? These are the two factors that keep exercising my mind over the last week or so. It's quite strange for China to do this kind of a thing. I think we have just lost General Hasnain temporarily. Okay. I think we lost you for a minute.
A slightly weak connection.
Okay. So I was just dilating on that same question.
Can you just give me that cue to that question again?
Yeah. So 2 points. One is about that article that appeared, and the second is about the 1959 claim line. Okay. I think, yes, please.
I'll try and answer this before we get disconnected again. There's no doubt that you see, we tend to read. We do have a slightly defensive mindset in our country because of our earlier experience with China. There's no doubt a generation, 2 generations will live with that kind of a mindset. Hopefully, the recent events should hugely dent that mindset. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, you must remember that the Chinese on the other side, any adversary on the other side, will also be reading you. What they are putting out in the media and global times and things like that is all propaganda. They also will be reading you from a realistic angle, if they are realists. And they will be understanding what your capability is. And one of your capabilities, if I was a Chinese at the moment, a member of the PLA, I would be looking at the Indian Army soldier, the hardiness of the Indian Army soldier. Despite his equipment not being state of the art, but the tremendous human resource element in the Indian Army, the levels of motivation and leadership, And I would classify the center of gravity virtually, or the lower center of gravity, as the young officer of the Indian Army, the kind of leadership that he can provide. And with that kind of a reading and understanding, I would definitely perceive that if you have inducted 3 or 4 regiments of T-90s into this area, then you should definitely expect that these are not purely for the defense of Demchok or the defense of Chushul or the defense of DBO through the Depsang route. It is as much there for an offensive capability. And the Indian Armored Corps is definitely not reputed or known for its high quality defensive warfare. They are better known for their offensive warfare, which is what they have proved in all the wars that they have fought. So I think the Chinese are not wrong. If they are assessing this and putting it out, and what you have read in their assessments, it is absolutely right. It is one aspect of being realistic about assessments of your adversary. You know, we all in the armed forces, we live in 2 different worlds. One is the make-believe world around us to say that, we are the strongest, they are the weakest, and this, that. And the second is the realistic world, right? The realistic world in which we actually work and make our plans and things like that. I think the Chinese are in a similar kind of a state. And what you have read is the second part of the realistic assessment that they have made of the Indian Armed Forces.
And what about the 1959 claim line assertion?
Yeah. You see, my impression when I read it 10 days ago, when the 1959 claim line issue started coming out, first of all, it's been insufficiently exposed in the media at the moment. And I think rightly so, the Indian media has not stressed on it too much. Probably with a purpose and probably with some kind of a direction from somewhere which is very sensible. We shouldn't be looking at the 1959 claim line at all, right? Even in 1959, we rejected it very clearly. And if the Chinese had any intent of trying to play the 1959 claim line, then they shouldn't have started, first of all, coercing us on the line of actual control. They should have first spoken about their claim line and then started looking at the coercion on the LAC. Secondly, since 1993, 22 engagements have taken place between our working groups. How is it that in these 22 engagements, the question of 1959 never arose? From day 1 of 1993, we have been talking and telling them, let us first get together and at least come to the working understanding of an LAC, so that while we are resolving the border, there are no misconceptions and there are no misunderstandings between us. The Chinese felt that by keeping a diffused LAC, it was always advantageous to them. So that way they could, every year generate some controversy over it and keep the Himalayan region aflame every other year. Now, all of a sudden, when they find that the situation is turning against them very awkwardly, they suddenly brought out the 1959 claim line. It is helping, basically, it's a part of their overall strategy to keep confusing, keep diverting attention to different things. And you'll find that the next thing will be that in the Corps Commander talks, which are again likely to take place, they'll start bringing in this aspect. And will confuse the hell out of everyone out there, because this is not something on which you are working at all for any time. You're not even prepared to talk about it. So I think it's the Chinese are looking at this of experience here. And once I think, well, that's my understanding and perception. A lot depends on the American election and the outcome of it. A lot depends on the outcome of the COVID-19. When will it end? How will it end? In what state will it end, in the sense which country most affected? Economically, which is the country which is coming back into resurgence, etc. All this is going to make a difference. And the Chinese know that they've got a place cut out for them in the geopolitical structure of the world, in the post-COVID situation. So they will bide their time. They will not coerce us more. There may be an odd, in the winter, there could be an expectation of these mountain posts around Chushul here and there. They don't have the capability to counter-attack and recapture all those in Ladakh, I would be extremely careful. And I would warn my troops, keep them ready at any time, because winter, a lot of people think that winter operations are not possible.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just lost you for half a minute. Okay, so now let me ask you a final question, and then we go into the question answer round. Why are we so shy about not touching the one China issue? I mean, they are talking about they don't want to recognize Ladakh, they don't want to recognize Arunachal, they don't want to, they even try and unsettle the settled borders in Sikkim. All that they keep doing, and we never talk about Tibet and Taiwan. Why is that hesitation? Why is that little? Is that a little weakness, or is it
This
on
is a
purpose?
very interesting question. It doesn't come out from weakness. It comes out from mindsets. It essentially comes from mindsets. Besides that, we do not have the kind of ambitions which the Chinese have got, of setting up empires and things like that, to reach out to the world. And the BRI, for example, a lot of people think it's a commercial venture, it's a business venture. Actually, everyone knows it's a strategic venture, right? India doesn't have any such intentions, any such aims. We are happy within our borders. We need to do good for our people. We need to be a strong, powerful, economically vibrant nation, right? When you have a nation such as India with this kind of an intent internally and with this foreign policy, and China on the other side with its kind of intent and foreign policy, you will find this diametrically different, completely different kind of an attitude towards foreign policy as a whole. I would say that the last 5 months have seen you changing your attitude. You've seen the confidence which is built in your political leadership in dealing with this. You've seen your military leadership getting more and more confident. Your troops are getting more and more confident. Your dealing with the rest of the world is much more pragmatic, sensible. You're believing in multilateralism, etc. I think India essentially at this stage is not looking to perpetuate this problem or to actually trigger anything. We are looking essentially as much as China is looking, as an exit. The both countries should exit from this situation. And to that extent, if India can help in it, assist in that situation, it is for our better. It is for overall good of not us, but for both nations, for China and for India. And therefore, I think we are what I would call it, we are giving peace a very strong chance. And in that process, I think Mr. Modi and his cabinet have thought this through and are not looking at unnecessarily creating any coercion, any triggering of anything which may upset the overall balance which seems to be existing at the moment. Although all options are open, it just takes an overnight decision to change everything. It just takes a decision to start next morning on television, in media, a couple of statements on the one China policy, and you'll find things changing diametrically. On Tibet, changing diametrically, right? So I think it's just an element of being a little careful at this time. And I, for one, totally endorse that. I'm not a warmonger on this at all. I would not like to see a war fighting between the two nations at this stage, especially when the Indian economy is not doing well at the moment. Our attention, our complete strategic focus must come back to the Indian economy and its resurgence. We need to get back to 6, 5, 5, 7, 8% kind of growth, which will make sure that we bounce back. And then maybe another day when you're economically stronger, maybe once again this whole situation may arise, and that way, at that stage, we may treat it differently.
Quite right. So we'll now move to the questions. And the questions, as usual, is, they will be flashed on the screen, and I'll read them out as well. So
Okay.
let's move to the question and answer round.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
And I request my viewers, please like, share, and subscribe the videos. Press the bell icon in order to get the notifications in time. And if you can help us a little bit with your contributions, you're liking your content, that will be very, very welcome. So the first question is Yogesh Soman. Are we seeing a December war? A very straight question.
It's a straightforward question. And frankly saying, I'm speaking to a lot of organizations, the corporate world, in fact, which I have actually put this heading. Are we heading for a war this season? And it's not a wrong question, because the signals which the public picks up, you see, the public doesn't look at it professionally. You and I are looking at it with a depth of knowledge, a depth of understanding of this entire thing. The public doesn't look at it that way. They just get signals from the media. And therefore, I want to assure your viewers that, to my mind, you can't rule out not war, but engagements. The kind of force levels which the Chinese have got on the line of actual control does not contribute to any understanding of an all-out war at the moment. It can be exchanges here and there. What the Chinese have definitely felt very slighted by, because they are very egoistic people, and the PLA itself is very egoistic about things, no end to about itself. But the fact that on 29th, 30th of August, we went and occupied a string of areas along the Kailash range, Black Top, Black Top, Helmet Top, Richinla, Rezangla, Mukpari, and the whole lot of them all along. It sort of astounded the Chinese, and they must have been livid. I'm sure that there must have been a lot of axing at the higher levels, which must have taken place in the Western Theatre Command. So, to that extent, the Chinese may, even while they're talking to you every 7 or 10 days, they may be preparing something to be done on 1 or 2 posts. If you want to do it against 7 or 8 posts, you will have to bring a very large force. Just remember that with the current state of preparedness, I would say 6 or 7:1 kind of a ratio would be required to evict our troops from there. And a tremendous amount of firepower, which the Chinese have got, no doubt. But that will virtually entail a response from us all along the front in different areas. So it just can't be limited. You can't say you can have a restricted engagement in one place. Obviously, it will spread to other places. So therefore, I do think that we have to be prepared for that kind of a situation. 20th October is the very important date when the war in 1962 started. It ended on the 18th of November, 18th, 19th of November, 1962. And therefore, yes, it's very much possible. We have to be prepared. I would be the last person to tell my army or advise anyone anywhere to say, stand down. There's no likelihood of war. When you are on the war front, always be prepared for war.
Right. So next question. Devabha, is India as weak as portrayed by Praveen Sahni, or we are capable of defending every inch of our land?
Mr. Devabha, I would strongly recommend to you to listen to me very carefully. I'm speaking on behalf of an army which is truthful, right? It doesn't hide its weaknesses here and there. I know it. I've commanded those troops on ground. I've been in Chushul, I have been in Eastern Ladakh, and I've been in Siachen. I've lived with these troops. I've commanded these troops. Let me tell you, it will need to, the Chinese army, the PLA will need to eliminate every single Indian soldier and every single Indian in uniform before he can think that he can climb onto any of those peaks, which is imagining that he can capture. I don't, there are lots of analysts in India who speak a lot of things. Hats off to them, very nice. I also read a lot of things that they say. But at the end of the day, I would strongly recommend to you, listen to those who have the experience, right? Those who have led the troops, those who experience these kind of situations on the ground, listen to them. They will probably give you the right pointers. I know that within the army also there are people who will be very defeatist and will tell you that the government has given nothing to the army and therefore the army should not fight and things like that. We are the last set of people in uniform who will ever go by that attitude, right? We belong to a great nation. We are a great army. We are a great set of armed forces. When push comes to shove, our lives on the line. Whatever the equipment, whatever the thing is there, anything which may be there, the enemy will have to really get past us.
They should remember the Battle of Rizang La.
Absolutely.
If they cannot remember that, then I think that is the one to remember. Next question, Anant Karthike. If war starts with chemical and biological weapons like COVID, then what is our preparedness? That kind of a war can be more horrible than a nuclear war.
Well, looking at the situation at the moment, I don't think the Chinese have the capability of this kind of a biological warfare. Possibly they have the means of chemical warfare. Although I think they are signatories to the 130 nations who have signed to the convention, the chemical convention.
Yes, they
I think they are signatories to that. So to that extent, that the Chinese may not be a very legalistic society. They may not be those who will respect legal norms, etc. They can do anything probably to achieve a military victory. But I would still expect that the Chinese want to live in this world as a member, as a part of the international community. They are part of the United Nations. They are part of the Security Council. They are members of different committees all over the United Nations. If they resort to this kind of a thing, which, and it may be difficult to prove, of course, that whether they have resorted to that or not, but if they at all resort to this kind of a thing, I think they will be virtually pariah in international community. And the international community in the COVID times today has become very sensitive to this kind of a thing. You've seen what's happened to Australia. Australia was a country which was willing to be coerced by the Chinese to any extent to manage its economy. Subsequently, they have become tigers. They said, like hell, go to hell, we will not adhere to your things. And the state of China-Australia relations isn't very, very good at this time. So, while it is good to imagine that this kind of a threat exists, even the nuclear threat exists between us. And by the way, CBRN threats, all four of them, are covered under the overall umbrella. So I don't think that international norms will permit the Chinese. It has taken the Chinese a long time, since 1969, when President Nixon when he sent Kissinger to Beijing. It's from then that the Americans have been working on them to bring them into the international system, primarily to make sure that they are not a rogue state. Because the Americans knew, they were pragmatic, that a rogue state of 1 billion people at that time, 1 billion people, cannot keep the world happy at that time. So I'm sure the Chinese are fully aware of that. And they know that the economy is also based on an international globalization system. Not just on their own, it's not just an economy working on its own. There are supply chains internationally which are working, which is providing the Chinese economy. So I don't think the Chinese are going to risk that kind of thing.
Okay. Next question. Sahil Gupta. General, why India is not helping Armenia? They need us.
Good question. And it's a very interesting conflict. Although it's far apart from Ladakh, but let me take you there. This conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh is a conflict which has gone on since 1993, 94. It's a It's a hangover. It's a legacy of the breakup of the Soviet Union. It's a typical problem which was happening in many parts of the world at that time. That a nation breaks up and you find a minority element left behind in that nation. So you found a lot of Armenian. This is this enclave called Nagorno-Karabakh, which the Azerbaijanis were claiming, in which there were a large number of Armenians present there, and conflict between them has broken out at least 3 to 4 times in the last 26 years. This time it seems to be very serious, and it seems to be having a proxy effect, in the sense that we hear that the Pakistanis have sent, may not have sent them, but there are Pakistani mercenaries probably coming out of Afghanistan who are going to fight on behalf of Azerbaijan. It's a hugely confusing conflict, let me tell you. Azerbaijan is essentially considered a part of the Shia crescent, but it's got a Sunni element. But it is receiving a lot of support from the Sunni countries. Turkey, Pakistan. It's not getting support from Iran to that extent, right? And Armenia, I think, is getting, if I'm not mistaken, I may have been slightly mistaken, is getting support from the Saudis, which is a really awkward kind of a situation which has built up here. I have not understood the international importance of it and how it can make a difference to this area of the South Caucasus, because this is a very important area around the Caspian Sea. It's a very important area. This is a crucible of energy of the world. It's an essential sub-element of the new great game which is going on in Central Asia and this region. But I am yet a little too apprehensive and not too sure as to how the impact of this conflict is going to be there on the geopolitical situation in the Middle East or in Central Asia.
Okay. And since we still have a very large number of questions.
Sorry, I didn't answer the question as to why India is not supporting. India, as a rule, if you remember, India as a rule keeps away from such conflicts. You've seen in the Syrian theater also, we were reasonably, we looked to be supporting the Syrians at certain times. We did not say anything against the Americans at most times. We did not condemn, even when the Iranians and the Americans keep fighting against each other here and there, we try and take a very, very balanced and central stance on this. So the similar thing should continue here. Remember that the impact internally is always there in India. You have a very large Shia community in India, right? And you don't want to upset balances here and there for the sake of not getting any support or any major geopolitical dividend out of supporting Armenia there at this particular time. If I would say if the whole European Union was supporting Armenia at this time or something like that, and someone asked you to, push your lot into it, perhaps India could do it. But no one is at the moment taking major sides. Why should we jump into the conflict, which is an uncalled for thing?
Quite right. And since we still have a very large number of questions to go, I would request you to keep your answers a little brief. Though the viewers would want a detailed answers, but still we have the constraints of time. We're already touching 1 hour. Are we heading towards World War III, especially after COVID-19? Rajendra Singh.
It all depends on how you classify what World War III will be like. If your mindset is World War I and World War II, then you will not be able to predict a World War III. World War I was all about, in World War I, it was that tank came into being, the Battle of the Somme. If you remember, it was huge engagements between tank forces. It was all about trench warfare. It was about gas warfare a lot and things like that. Millions of people died. India lost 72,000 soldiers in that. Again, come to Second World War, India lost 86,000 soldiers altogether. We had an army which is large. We had a British Indian army that time, larger than what the Indian army is today. So it was all conventional, right? World War III can have all kinds of different definitions. It can be hybrid in nature. It can be trade related, it can be terror related, it can be subconventional related. Now, therefore, I would say you have been in a state of World War III for very long, actually. If you look at all this happening, particularly ever since the global war on terror started, we've been in a virtual state of war. If you look at it civilizationally, the very famous theory of the clash of civilizations, then the Islamic civilization on one side against the Christian civilization on the other side, the rest of the nations joining in different ways. We've been at virtual war with each other. And this war is also being fought much through the networks, through the, at the moment, the Al-Qaeda is not in a physical state. The Al-Qaeda is in a virtual state. The ISIS is not in a physical state, it's in a virtual state at the moment. It can emerge somewhere and disappear again. So this is, I'm sorry if this is very philosophical, but I think the whole idea of a world at war, the definition will have to be bracketed and understood before we can really take this discussion any way further.
Right. Himanshu Pandey, sir, suppose if Chinese intrude to Nepal or Bhutan or Myanmar parallel to Indian territory, what shall be the Indian response?
Well, Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar. Why would the Chinese, first of all, do that? Why would the Chinese do that? Primarily to coerce India to take over these territories. Obviously, if that happens, then it's a challenge. It's a direct challenge to India. It's a direct challenge to India. And India has the capability to carry out a response if necessary. It has the necessity to the capability to carry out a response. Nothing has happened to our territory in this scenario which you're painting. Nothing has happened to our territory except the threat. But remember that most large nations, as large as India, consider a threat or an unfriendly act against a neighbor of this kind as an act virtually against yourself. Go back to what happened with Bhutan. Go back to what happened at Doklam. After all, at the tri-junction there, it was Bhutanese territory, supposedly Tibetan territory, and Indian territory, all under question. And we made sure that we looked after the Bhutanese interests. So that's a very small example of it. But I would say that we would definitely come to the assistance of these countries. Definitely. Politically, we would definitely support them. Diplomatically, we would definitely support them. None of them have the capability to militarily resist China. But I'm looking at the plausibility of such a scenario. Why would the Chinese do it? Because to do these kind of things, it only, again, as I told you in my earlier response, it brings in the ire of the world. And I know that the Chinese are in that habit of trying to show two fingers to the world. But let me tell you, that two-fingered bit can be shown up to a limit. And you've seen it with this situation with India this time. They thought that it would be a cakewalk. And then India actually showed them those two fingers. Right?
Yeah, right.
And they backed off. They have backed off. So it's not as if the Chinese are going to be crazy to do a thing like that overnight and try and coerce India into some kind of. They know that what will be the geopolitical and the geostrategic effects of this kind of thing.
Right. Okay. This is a question we've discussed already. Can India be assertive enough to reject one China policy?
I think we have responded to this adequately, and I said it very clearly that at the given time, someone like, actually, if you look at Prime Minister Modi's leadership, he is a person who's only when he's driven to the wall will he make an assertion of this kind. Otherwise, he will give peace a chance. And this is what his directives, I'm sure, are to the foreign minister and the defense minister, both of them who went to Moscow carrying that message and came back from there with a reasonably good, stable understandings, right? In a situation such as this, I couldn't have expected anything more than this. I mean, he came back with fairly good understanding of the whole thing and a reasonably good solution to it, temporarily, if nothing else. So I would say that a one-China policy, if required at all, if you find that the Chinese are are coercing us to such an extent, and if we can get any dividends out of it. Whenever you ask a question in your mind also, you should be imagining what is the dividends you're looking at. Can we get major dividends out of following a one China policy? Oh, sorry, looking at Taiwan as an alternative, right? Looking at that policy. But if you find that you are really getting nothing out of it, of course, economically we can get a lot out of Taiwan. There's no doubt about it. And we can irk China to a very great extent. A country of India's size, 1.3 billion, on the kind of, economic part, maybe weak at the moment, but resurging economic part. Something that a nation of this stature suddenly decides and takes along a lot of other nations and probably motivates many other nations to do that. That is going to be a serious dent to China. There's no doubt about it. But that situation is going to be a difficult one to arrive at. Yeah.
Okay. Next one. Okay. It says that always a pleasure to listen to Hasnain sir, a true officer and gentleman. I wanted to know his thoughts on whether our inadequacy of UCAV in comparison to PLA could become an issue if there is a war.
There is a lot of effort going on, let me tell you. And I dare say, yes, the Chinese have got an asymmetrical advantage they have. There's no doubt about it, right? But under this Atmanirbharta campaign and the fast track acquisitions that we are going into, I understand. I'm not in touch with anyone in government on this, let me tell you that. I don't believe in this business of prying around and trying to find out what is happening in government, etc. Right? I am very clear in my mind. It's my own assessment that this is something which should be happening. And I am very certain that this is one domain which is receiving the attention of both the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy to that extent. All three forces. Because this is the future. The whole aspect of unmanned munitions, unmanned aircraft, etc. This is the future form of warfare. And the earlier we get into it, the better it is. So at the moment, yes, there is a level of disadvantage, no doubt. But not to that extent, as I told you, because we don't seem to be in a situation where we are going in for a open confrontation or an all-out war, etc. And under these circumstances of engagements on the line of actual control, etc., I think our capability is sufficient. It's reasonably balanced the way it is, which I.
Right. There's Pakaman. Okay, this is a pseudonym. Are Chinese quietly tunneling their supply lines?
Interesting question. A lot of people may think that this is a funny question, but interesting question. My experience goes back to 1978 when I saw the Chinese for the first time at Nathula. And I was occupying the post next to Nathula, a higher post called Sebula, where I used to sit in the morning and have a cup of tea, and I used to keep looking at the Chinese side. I used to hear blasting going on all over. I used to wonder what the hell. And I realized when I read the records of that post, etc., as to what really was happening all these years, I realized the Chinese were only into tunneling. Now, the Chinese believe in tunneling tremendously because they believe that they can put their guns inside it, they can put their ammunition inside it, and if push comes to shove, in war, they can even billet their troops inside tunnels. So it's not tunneling only for the sake of road communications that the Chinese believe in. They believe in tunneling for lots and lots of things. Now, there are mountains on their side also. It's not just plains in Ladakh. So I'm sure if you ask a lot of our troops in front, they must be hearing a lot of blasts here and there, I'm sure. So there must be tunneling going on, I'm sure. And that's a part of their, not their logistic lines, supply lines, but a part of their logistics of dumping. A part of, so that it's a fascinating thing. There's no doubt. If you have that capability to dig down or tunnel inside, it keeps you very safe from the air. Because the only way the air can get you is then direct firing into a tunnel. But I'm sure then in tunnel also there is a way of creating tunnels to make sure that you overcome that problem, right? So I'm sure your question is a good question, and I'm glad that you are aware of a thing like this, but this is a practice of the PLA.
Okay. We have 11 questions more to go, just to warn you. Publication 2. Can the general give us a hint whether India is also indulging in fifth generation warfare?
You know, my response to this kind of a question, whenever it comes to me, anywhere in the public domain, I always tell the person who's questioning, would you want me to talk about covert warfare? Would you want me to reveal plans as to how we like to spend spies here, play spy games there, obtain information and do something nasty to our enemy here and there? Does it make sense to talk about it?
Okay.
I mean, if you are doing fifth generation warfare, why should I be talking about it?
Okay.
Damn good if you're doing it. Very, very good thing if you're doing it. But let's not talk about it.
Yes. That's perfect answer. Let it remain classified. Ashok Kumar, sir, how should India prepare to tackle Chinese PLA in future skirmishes? I think this point has been answered. So, would you?
I've answered it to an extent, but let me very briefly comment. Skirmishes, what do you mean by skirmishes? You have to define. You see, these terminologies are very awkward terminologies. And in the army, military, we always believe in our definitions. We spend a lifetime in staff college and places like that, understanding each of these terminologies. What is their connotation and implication of skirmish? A skirmish is a limited engagement. It's a limited engagement for a limited period of time with very, very limited objectives, right? In that case, the weakest of states against the strongest of states in a skirmish can actually have virtual parity, symmetry, right? So, I think India has the capability to handle any skirmish anywhere along the line. You saw what happened in Galwan, right? You saw it in Galwan. The Chinese are not going to reveal their casualties. They're not going to come out with what happened to them. I'm sure Colonel Babu and his men really let the Chinese have it. And the Chinese were lucky there was no Gurkha unit around there, right? Otherwise, they would have found a lot of bloodshed by kukris all over the place. Once you unleash the Gurkhas, they can be a terrible weapon by themselves, right? So largely skirmishes, I don't think India will mostly come out the better in a skirmish of this nature.
Viral Patel, thank you. He's just complimenting us. That's all. That's next one. Viral Patel again. Thank you. He's been very kind. Abhimanyu Moite, is Hitler behaving like Hitler? Well, I wrote
Actually,
2 articles on it,
surprised.
saying exactly that.
I'm surprised by our friend Xi Jinping, as you call 11 Jinping. I'm actually surprised by him because what we saw of him in 2013, 14, 15, as a guest of Mr. Modi when he came here, his exchanges with Mr. Modi. And by the way, I've written a lot on this in a recent article where a lot of criticism was coming up against our Prime Minister as to why did we engage with China all these years, in the last 4 or 5 years, trying to establish this partnership, etc. You have to be sensible enough to realize that no political leader of any standing ever wants only to go to war or things like that. He means good for his people, right? And you know that the source and the start point of the supply chain of the world is China. It is Hong Kong, it is Shenzhen, it is Shanghai, and places like that, right? So everything which was being done by our Prime Minister was essentially for the good of the nation, economic good of the nation. I strongly believe in that. And you've been let down. And Xi Jinping, of all people, I mean, I expected him. But after 2017, after Doklam, the suspicion was in the mind that Xi Jinping was playing awkward. And the ambitions which were becoming very evident when the Chinese Communist Party laid down 2049 as its milestone, 2035 as its milestone, it started emerging that now Xi Jinping was looking to be the president for life. He could not look at 2049 as the goal, as the time or the timeline in which the goals could be achieved or should be achieved. He wanted them in his lifetime. And his lifetime is ideally calculated as 2035. He'll be 82 years old at that time, right? So this is the reason why Xi Jinping probably has changed tack. And it happens to dictators around the world. They love to sit back and think of themselves, everything achieved, tied up, knotted up, right? As if everything is ready by 2035, when he will probably demit office, or he may die ultimately after 2035, or whatever it is. So there's no doubt there's a Hitlerian streak which has emerged in Xi Jinping. No doubt. Let's see where it takes it.
Okay. Next one. Another super sticker. Thank you, Mr. Patel. You're very, very kind today. Abhishek, can we collaborate with China and convert CPEC to CIEC and isolate Pakistan in the region completely?
Good question. That's a good question. It's an offbeat question. Different to the situation at the moment. There's nothing wrong. I personally feel people who are viewing it and thinking that this is a very awkward question. Let me tell you, I always think this is something out of the box and damn good. Why not? There's no doubt that if China and India could get their act together, they could make this entire thing of the spread of the Chinese, the BRI, etc. It could be a great venture. It could be a great venture. But the problem is the Chinese system is different. You see, the base problem between China and the rest of the world is, while you may be cooperating, etc., you have brought China into the international community, you have networked China's economy with the rest of the world, but the Americans have done all this. At the end of the day, you have to remember China is still a communist country, right? And China is a country which has got a deep memory of its past. It's got a huge aspiration, looking for itself to be the number one country of the world. India has never declared itself that we want to be number one country of the world. All we always say is we want good for our people. We never talk about ourselves as number one country of the world like the way the Chinese have laid down for 2049 or 2035, etc. So our working philosophies, essential working philosophies, are quite different. So I don't think our interests can actually meet even at the peripheral level. And that's the reason why I feel that the possibility of India-China cooperation on a geopolitical level in a thing like BRI is out of question.
Okay. Next one. Another super sticker. Thank you, Mayur. Viral Patel. One more. Jai Hind, Lieutenant General Hasnain. Viral Patel is now absolutely a fan of General Hasnain. Shnijis. Has India-China benefited Pak too much or lot? JF-17. Actually, he means his China benefited
nuclear
Pak
missiles, J-17s, etc. Has India-China benefited Pakistan?
No, India is actually superfluous. He means China benefited.
Has China? Well, you have to remember that this question is back the first question on Pakistan. There's no doubt about it that Chinese interests in Pakistan are tremendous. If you have to just look at one map of Asia to understand that the bypass to the entire Indian Ocean lies through Pakistan, China-Pakistan economic corridor, or it lies through Tajikistan and via Iran. But Iran is at the moment a pariah, so therefore the Iranian infrastructure, Chabahar, Bandar Abbas, etc., is not perhaps so easily available. Besides that, Gwadar Port offers a tremendous scope for the domination of what is called the area of the Northwest Indian Ocean. So, to that extent, Pakistan is a very, very important country for China. And Pakistan overall, if you just analyze its geostrategic location, is probably geostrategically one of the most important countries of the world. Access to Central Asia, access out of Central Asia into the Indian Ocean, access into Afghanistan, prevention of Indian access to Central Asian republics, prevention of access of TAPI, Tajikistan, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, gas pipeline, which if it is successfully made, can overcome India's 25% of India's chemical gas requirement. So Pakistan has got a tremendous amount in its hand. And therefore, obviously, it is exploiting it. When a country has got its geostrategic advantages, it will exploit it. And the Chinese recognized this very early in the 60s when the investment in the Karakoram Highway which ultimately came up in 1979. And ever since, they have always understood that they have not supported Pakistan in any of the wars so far. They have only made noises. 65, they made noises. 71, they made noises. 99, some things are being revealed today, that few things had happened here and there in Eastern Ladakh. But besides that, the Chinese have kept away. But today is a situation where I feel China requires Pakistan more than Pakistan requires China. Because of Gilgit-Baltistan, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, the amount of money invested into it, the bypass of the Indian Ocean away from the Malacca syndrome and things like that. So too many things going with Pakistan. And therefore, if China provides Pakistan with submarines and with tanks and with aircraft, well, that's a part of the overall cooperation.
Quite right. V guard, role of AIM PLB, AIMIM, AIUDF, AIUML, aim of Ghazwa Hind,
Outside the scope.
Islamization of India. In fifth, what he wants to ask is this
Fifth
fifth
generation
generation warfare?
This is a subject by itself. Ask me one day, invite me one day. I'm sure Sanjay Saab and I can have a great discussion on the whole aspect of what I conduct as a talk for the Indian Army in many institutions is called the strategic investigation of Islam, as to what effects of Islam actually affect the strategic environment. Right? One day,
Yes,
maybe
that's
we'll
a great subject. I think we can have that because I have my own research and deep studies of Islam.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Deependra Singh, should not India think of getting back the land occupied by China?
Of course, we must always keep that in our mind. I always think that this loss of land is a temporary thing. What's happened in Depsang and what may have happened in Pangong, etc., is all a temporary thing. Psychologically, let me tell you, whatever you may have lost here and there, psychologically, by getting on top of these 7 features in the Kailash range, you have gained a psychological advantage, a tremendous psychological advantage, which under no circumstances, status quo ante should not be a word to be used today, a term to be used today. So status quo ante would mean that you would have to hand over these features, right? You have to negotiate in such a way to say that these features are ours. They were always a part of the line of action, this side of the line of action control. We have only occupied them now. While the Chinese have to vacate Pangong So 4 to Pangong So 8, the finger 4 to finger 8, and they have to vacate the Y junction, that area of the Depsang Plains, has all got to be vacated. This is something that you have to work on continuously.
Yeah. Right. Okay, Mr. Viral Patel again. Thank you so much, sir. You were very generous today. Sahil Gupta, help Armenia counter Turkey, make base in Armenia. Oh, that's a new one. Yes, I think your nod says much, and that should be it.
Indians hate China because we lost our 21. Would you like to condemn EAM?
Would you like to
greeting
condemn
PRC?
EAM greeting PRC on the 71st?
What is EAM?
External Affairs Minister.
Achha, greeting PRC? No. This is one thing which I want to tell you again. Don't look at these situations in black and white. Right? Nations, mature nations, look at it. There's no doubt about it. We lost 40 people against the Pakistani proxy war support. We lost 40 of our brave Jawans of the CRPF. Yes, there's no doubt we went in for a strike at Balakot, etc. We don't have the best of relations with China today, but we still do continue to wish Pakistan on Independence Day. We haven't broken off diplomatic relations with China, have we? We continue to function in the United Nations as a part. In fact, India has now entered the Security Council. So should we always say that anytime China is sitting on the Security Council and they are a permanent member, we will not sit there because we don't have relations with them and they killed 21 of our soldiers? Sorry, I mean, these things don't work this way. There are two different dimensions of things. There are two different dimensions. You have to understand these things. You don't work with emotions when it comes to international politics.
Right. Sahil Mahal, what are the reforms required in the Ordnance Factory Board after the CAG report?
There's a lot of discussion going on in the veteran groups everywhere. And there's no doubt, my opinion is that there's no doubt that a restructuring and accountability A higher accountability is definitely needed in some of these organizations. You may have read many reports which have come in the last 2 days in the newspapers that India could have bought so many guns because which would have from the money which we have wasted because of all the amount of ammunition that we have had to destroy, all manufactured under the Ordnance Factory Board, ammunition manufactured in India which has turned unfireable, in the sense you can't make it unusable, and much of it has had to be destroyed. So there's no doubt that quality control is something which is just not there. We have to understand this, and there has to be a much higher accountability, culpability of faults, mistakes, and accountability of this. The moment you start speaking about this and you find unionism and unions jumping up here and there, and you'll find the complete internet will get jammed with the kind of things which come out from the OFP, etc. Forget everything. Look at the worth for the country. The nation has to spend this money. It is the taxpayers' money. And we better know how to spend that money correctly. There's a lot of this thing against the DRDO in certain issues. The DRDO has achieved so much in the field of missilery and things like that. But there are certain issues where there are mistakes. And we should not hesitate in calling a shot there either. So I fully agree with you that yes, we do need more. Well, I don't know how to really restructure it as such, but definitely we need more accountability.
Okay, Vaibhav Kamble, would holding heavy deployment long-term incur heavy cost, and does China want India to pay this cost to hurt our economy?
Well, when you're a nation this big, and you've decided that you have certain threats, you see, no one imagines overnight that you want 1,500 aircraft, or you want 4,000 tanks, or you want infantry so many divisions. No one just thinks overnight and starts doing that. This whole process is a very complex process. It's called force structuring, right? Force structuring is a subject by itself in different departments of the armed forces, right? You go to the headquarter IDS, you'll find a full thing on perspective planning and force structure, force development as it's called, FD, right? It starts from threats. What are your threats? Okay, threats from Pakistan, threats from China, subconventional threats, conventional threats. In what are the kind of objectives that these threats can be related to? Based upon that, what should India's policy be? Should we be offensive? Should we be defensive? Should we be offensive, defensive? Based upon this, you start structuring your forces, right? And you come to some pragmatic figures and to say that we need this size of a force. We need to have so much of ammunition. I had a long talk with Mr. Manohar Parikar. Let me tell you, I sent a complaint to him once. I sent a complaint to the late Mr. Manohar Parikar. God bless his soul. Wonderful man, absolutely. I told him this business of our ammunition management is getting very, very negative. We need to have our 40 days ammunition. You know, that 30 days normal and 30 days intense. He came back and we had a long discussion. He invited me to his office. I didn't go there, but I went home and had a dinner with him and discussed very deeply with him. And he convinced me that we actually don't need so much of ammunition. In no times in earlier wars have all this ammunition been fired. And not every sector is active. So not every unit is using up 30 days normal and 30 days intense. So they came to certain pragmatic figures, which I don't want to talk about. And they empowered the army with that, and the armed forces are now empowered to purchase that much and keep that much ammunition, right, at any time. So there's a level of pragmatism in all this. And so whatever we are buying today, you can't say that a 42 squadron air force is an overkill for India. No, it is not. In a dual front war, you need more than that. So it's not as if our weapon holdings and our ammunition holdings, etc., are an overkill. It is very much as per the requirements of the threats and the requirements of the force structuring and force development, which has been studied and catered for by the armed forces.
Right. Okay, next one. This is another pseudonym, Nastik Sanatani. Namaste. Is India acquiring the MQ-9 Reaper drones from the US? How much of a game changer will this acquisition be for the LAC and the LOC? Jai Hind.
Well, the Reaper drones are armed drones, no doubt. Any armed drones, forget the Reaper, any armed drones used in the tactical operational mode will be of great help on the LOC particularly. The LAC is not active. It's not active every day firing of that kind. LOC, yes, definitely. You are having firing there every other day, particularly on terrorist bases. Particularly because on the LOC we do get a lot of information about the locations where targets, where terrorists are sitting, waiting to infiltrate, etc. We get almost hard information on intelligence on that. So they will come in very, very handy there. Also for punishing our adversary, but you must remember that equally the other side will also get them, and they are in the process of getting all this. So the future is about drones. There's no doubt. The future is about drones, and the lethality of drones is only increasing. The lift capability and the lethality of drones for the future is only increasing, and you're going to find in India the development of drones is going to be a big thing which will come to India as a part of this Atmanirbharta campaign. Yeah,
Right.
I think should we call an end here somewhere? Yeah.
I think we got 2-3 more. Let's take them quickly.
Okay. Okay.
So you can have a one-liner or two-liners, and then you can wind it up. Wars in the past have increased industrialization and GDP of participating nations. Shouldn't we go in for controlled small war? WW1 US economic output doubled. Countries like US will come to stop us anyway.
There's no doubt defense industry adds tremendously to economic value, economic development. It's happened. Yes, you are right. What you're quoting is absolutely right.
Okay.
The United States, let me give you an example. Post the Gulf War I, the United States signed an agreement with Kuwait for the purchase and supply of 150 F-15 fighter aircraft. They were not the state of the art, and they were not the F-16 variety. Definitely not. They were a generation or two generations behind. By ordering 150 F-15 aircraft, the factory lines in America, in the US, would be open for the next 5 years, employing 6,000 people. Now you can see, imagine how, and I'm only giving you one example of the tip of the iceberg, and that too just one aircraft. That's about all. There are hundreds of orders of this kind in the United States, right? Therefore, the attempt that we are making today, we started with the Make in India, we come to the Atmanirbharta. Besides just only doing it for yourself, there's no doubt it will assist us hugely, first of all, in job generation, scientific impact,
Right.
research and analysis.
We can move to the next question now. Now we'll have a rapid fire round.
Yeah.
Rapid fire. So
that's the thing I was just trying to convince them was that it's a good thing to go in for always for defense industry.
You can if you can answer with a yes or no, that would be wonderful. So that is the idea of rapid fire. Can India have many permanent army cantonments in Ladakh?
With the improving infrastructure, there may not be a requirement. Our capability to mobilize will be much faster. But definitely after this experience this year, there will be a need for additional troops in Ladakh.
Okay. Will Rahul Panchal, will India get a UN permanent seat in 21st century vis-a-vis China?
I don't visualize this happening in the next 10 years. And beyond that, it's very difficult to talk about in the geopolitical environment. But I do not believe that this can happen easily in the next 10 years.
Next one is Akash Chauhan, I think is asking from Japan. If the chicken's neck is choked, compromised, that means it's 2:30 in Japan. So 3:30 in the morning, he's listening to you. Choked or compromised, what are the ways to maintain the supply chain? One, via Bangladesh, via Myanmar, sea route, additional role of Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
He's basically talking about the Malacca syndrome. He's essentially talking about the Malaccas. Which is the chicken?
He's talking about
you're talking about the
Siliguri
talking about the Siliguri corridor. Can I have that question again? Can you just flash that question again? If the chicken's neck is choked, what are the ways to maintain the supply chain to the northeast via Bangladesh, via Myanmar and sea route, additional role of Andaman and Nicobar Islands? Well, that's a good question. All right. First of all, let me tell you, India will do everything to hold that piece of territory, right? And I'm sure we have, if nothing else, I'm sure we have some kind of agreements with Bangladesh to allow us to keep our troops in certain areas there, to give us the necessary broader corridor to go through. It's important that our relationship with Bangladesh is the best at all times. But Bangladesh is a very, very important country for us, for the Northeast, for our complete maintenance of the Northeast, right? But having said that, let me also tell you that if people are thinking that the Chumbi Valley and the Doklam area is an ideal area for the Chinese to start accessing the Siliguri corridor, let me tell you, think again. It's not an easy option for the Chinese. And we can place troops in Bhutan, we can place troops, we have got troops in Sikkim. Coming between two countries, even to a distance of 50-55 kilometers, is not something which any army would want.
Okay. Arun Tangri is basically talking about Operation Parakram. We lost too many, and we are still thinking of what to do. It's sad. Well, I think that's an observation, more of an observation than a question. So we passed that.
We lost a lot of troops in mistakes of mine laying and mine handling and mine removal. The people should know this. There's no doubt about it. There was a lot of it which happened, and there were faulty mines, many of them.
Okay, we got role of tanks in age of drones and air power.
Yeah, very much. The tank, you can't do away with the tank for so many years. I've been having this discussion with a lot of cavalry officers, and I've been supporting them strongly in saying that the role of the tank cannot be done away with. Air cavalry will take a long time for India to acquire, yet there are, of course, air cavalry is available in America. Today, the maneuver arm is the helicopter arm today rather than anything, the armed helicopter more than anything else. But I do think in our context, in the context of India, Pakistan, particularly, the tank will continue to be in Punjab and Rajasthan, Gujarat, it will be a very, very important.
Okay. So Parvesh Tiwari just said Jai Hind, and DPS Jadon is asking about why don't we claim oxygen internationally? We do. We've never.
Yeah, we do claim it. We claim oxygen as a part of Indian territory.
Yes,
in fact, our map also has shown it this time.
Yes,
Blue map which we have published of Ladakh.
Our regular map is having oxygen all the time. Abhilash Nanda, even after facing defeat in Doklam, how did China reassess our capabilities? Did they really underestimate us, or are we misunderstanding?
First of all, don't count Doklam as a victory or a defeat. It was a standoff which ended as a standoff, right? Nothing more. It was good psychological warfare at the end of it. Not a shot was fired. Remember that.
Okay. Next one. I think, is this the last one? Okay. Sanjay Ji, and that brings us to the end of this episode. This has been a marathon. We have beaten the IPL, as you said. And in spite of the IPL, we have had so many questions coming, and you have been so patient to answer. In fact, my desk was signaling to me all the time, but please request the General to keep it brief. We are going a lot over time. But anyway, that's your greatness, that you always take every question seriously and you try and answer every question to the best of your ability.
My philosophy is that someone who is taking the pain to listen to us and putting a question to us deserves to be given a response which is thought through response, not just something on the top of the head. That's my philosophy.
Correct. So that brings us to the end of this episode, and thank you, viewers. You've been great today, and thank you, General Hasnain. As always, you have been great. Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
And
thank you so much.
Clarified so many of the people's doubts, our viewers' doubts, and I do remember your offer of engaging you on that strategic impact of
we'll do that one day.
We'll
do
that. So we do that one day. Thank you once again. Good night. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Vande Mataram.